Hey, everybody, it's Dr. Eric Balcavage. We're back for another edition of the Thyroid Answers Podcast. And we have another guest today. Her name is Melanie Murphy Richter, right? Did I get that close?
You got it right. You got
All
it.
right. I said it for everybody who's listening. I did say it wrong before the show, but she is a registered dietitian nutritionist. And she's going to talk to us about the importance, I'm going to say, a plant-based diet, the significance, but we may get into vegetarianism, vegan, what her thoughts are there, maybe what she thinks about animal-based diets, and maybe more importantly, the significance of the standard American diet, especially in light of what's going on in the news right now with everybody going to Congress and companies and protesting the
Yeah.
toxins in our foods. So, Melanie, welcome to the Thyroid Answers podcast. How are you doing today?
Thank you for having me. I'm doing great. I'm happy it's turning fall where I am, so I'm ready to have this great conversation with you.
Fantastic. Well, you provided a really nice, short, but pretty nice synopsis of your background, but nobody wants to hear me read it. Why don't you give listeners a little bit of background about you, who you are, what you do, and why we should listen to you?
Yeah, thank you. So I am a registered dietitian. I have my master's in nutrition, health span, and longevity. I studied under Dr. Walter Longo at the Longevity Institute at USC. So I have a specialty in both uh, gut health and longevity and health span, and helping people to better understand the latest and greatest research as it relates to how nutrition can impact our ability to live in a healthy body for a long time. And I would say that's the bulk of what how I would introduce myself. I do a lot of uh, gut related healing work as it relates to toxin removal, like mold and yeast and things like that in my own practice. But we can talk about so many different things related to the thyroid and diet. So I'm excited.
So, you have dietitian nutritionist, right? Typically, you see the dietitian or a nutritionist. So a dietitian nutritionist different. You just have training in both of those, or is this a
That's
different type of training?
Well, that's a really good question. The RDN is quite literally the letters that you get when you become a dietitian. I think for probably because a lot of people, well, actually, I don't know the full answer to that. My guess is that a lot of people don't, when they think about somebody who deals with food, they always say nutritionist, but it's not. Nutritionists don't need licensing or education to say that they're nutritionists. Dietitians do. So we just take on both. We take on both letters.
Got it.
That's a good
Right.
question, though. I should look into why it's RDN and not just RD.
So, what so you started under Walter Longo. Was that the your like base training, or was that like extra training? Because a lot of dietitians, I don't know if they're getting the same type of education, importance of whole food based diets that maybe you're getting kind of into this kind of functional medicine type space. Is that
Right.
fair to say?
I think that's fair to say. I would say that first of all, we need more dietitians. If you're listening to this and you have an interest in food and nutrition, we need more of us in the world. But I would say that the dietetic space is still it's still making its way into the functional world. It's not, I wouldn't say that most training for master's degrees or dietetic degrees are, I would say they veer more towards clinical and traditional Western models. And partly why I chose the school that we went to for my master's degree was because of its emphasis on functional medicine, integrative medicine in a more holistic way. I mean, yes, we did cover a lot as it relates to Western care, but it did open the doors and open my mind to a lot of other options, and gave me a good framework to do some research on my own after graduation and kind of take this path on my own. So yeah, I would say that you're probably right. Most training for RDs are still very linked to clinical Western modalities, but there are absolutely tons of organizations, including the Integrative Functional Nutrition Program that I think Dr. Mark Hyman is very involved in. Speaking of people going to Congress to make changes for food, that are really helping nutrition dietitians to really navigate this new space.
Yeah, I say that because I started career in a hospital setting.
Yeah.
And one of the things that's clearly a problem, at least when I was in a hospital setting, was the nutrition and the food slash AKA nutrition that's fed to ill people
Yeah.
who I'm shocked by what was served to people on a regular basis. And when we think about, okay, there's, and no offense to you or any other dietitian that's out there, but there's dietitians that are running these kind of organizing and running departments of what the people have to eat. And and you would think that if there was a group of people that needed really healthy food, would be are people that are sick and in the hospital setting. So is that I haven't been in a hospital setting in a while, but is that still an issue?
I also will preface it by saying that I have incredible respect for dietitians in the clinical Western hospital setting, but their hands are tied in a lot of ways. And I think that dietitians are seen more um, as a check mark for a hospital rather than an actual outside of those that are, I feel like the really impactful RDs are probably in the ICU units and really keep, focused on tube feeds and things like that. That's incredible. And we need that. We need, emergent care is really, really important. But we're kind of seen in the Western hospital setting as kind of like a check mark to check off to make sure that people have talked to somebody. But we don't have a lot of dietitians in a clinical setting don't have a lot of autonomy over how to guide people. We're very much regulated in so many ways and have to make sure that we follow a trajectory. So we don't have a lot of creativity or input to be able to personalize things. And also, to be honest, I actually I was surprised myself at how much I did like the clinical setting. I didn't think I was going to like the clinical setting, but the thing that I realized very quickly in being in a clinical setting for internship and rotations was no one that's in that setting is asking for your help. You're coming into their world and saying, "Hey, looks like, you have XYZ and you need my help. Like, let me help you." That's not a very good way to approach people. So I realized in that setting, I was like, I want to work with people that want to work with me. And I want to work with people who are ready to make change. And it's very hard to do that in a setting where people don't care what you have to say. Like your input and advice is probably going in one ear and out the other. You rarely see them again. So there's not this element, unless you're in an outpatient situation, like a diabetic outpatient situation, but you're not making a huge impact. And it can be kind of exhausting, I think, for if you're a type of person that really wants to make change in the world. It's not really something that you can do in a Western clinical setting, unfortunately.
To be fair, I think what probably happens is you're doing the best you can, the resources available, and there's limited resources in most. I
Yeah.
think probably nutrition within a hospital setting is look at more like we've got a lot of mouths to feed. What's maybe the least expensive way we can do this with some semblance of proper
Yeah.
nutrition, except for when you're getting into that really intense type of nutrition, but general meals and stuff like that, it's
Well, and we have they have a formula. They have a formula that they know generally works for to make sure that people leave your hospital healthy or in a way that's viable. It's just not. It's not. I mean, nothing. I mean, I could go off on how our Western model works, but it definitely isn't in favor of dietitians. That's for sure. We're very much a compliance check, I think, for a lot of hospitals.
all right. So let's shift gears. And tell me what your overall opinion is of the problem with nutrition, especially in this country.
In the US, man, where do we begin?
Broad
I would,
overview, and then we'll go down into detail.
yeah, we'll go. I would say one of our biggest problems is the way that we have cultivated our agricultural environment and how we have incentivized or de-incentivized farmers to produce food, often against their better judgment, and how that's trickled down into our grocery stores, how that's trickled down into our food supply. We have a terrible agricultural culture here in the States, and our food is not grown the way that it should be grown. And we had, I would say the biggest shift, in my opinion, happened around the 1950s when we started to see an advent or an influx of heart disease and people dying of heart attacks around the 40s and 50s because of the increase of animal protein consumption, which this might be a good segue into that conversation if you want to. But what they found when people were like, wait, we've never seen heart attacks like this at this scale before, people started doing some research and realized that it was related to fat. And specifically, we know now that it's related to mostly trans and saturated fats in a large quantity. But they didn't differentiate between the fats at the time. They just said, all fats are bad. You're going to die of a heart attack. So remove fats from food. And the problem with doing that is and we went through several decades of low fat this, low fat cereals, low fat butter, no non-fat this. I grew up that way with low fat everything. And the problem with that, not only from a nutritional perspective, you're missing some massively key ingredient or key nutrients, but fat is what makes food taste good. So all of these food production and manufacturers were like, how do we sell our foods where we have to take away the thing that makes our product taste good? And the solution to that was to add sugar. So we've gone through a massive, and sugar technically, when you look at it from the outside, it is technically decently low calorie. So from a packaging perspective, doesn't look like a harmful food, but when you continue to add sugar into everything that you're eating, breads, processed foods, sauces, and layer on the fact that we've idealized convenience in every facet of our food system too, we're inundated. Our bodies are not equipped to be able to handle this much sugar. And we haven't recovered from that. I think that we didn't see diabetes, for instance, come into existence until later in the last century. Like it wasn't a disease that you saw. And now it's a disease we can't get away from. And that's very much related to our food system and our agriculture and how we've glorified certain types of living and food environments over others. So I would say that's probably my biggest takeaway.
Yeah, I would agree. I think there was, and I forget the gentleman who said it was all the fats and blame, they were kind of blaming on the fats and then made the change. And I think there's been a number of books written about it, and that research that he proposed was faulty, to be nice about it. Maybe some of it even than that. So now we've been over-consuming carbohydrates, over-consuming everything essentially for decades. And now we have chronic illness. We've never been sicker as a country than we are today. We consume more drugs than any other country in the world. So we'll talk about what's the strat, but now I think people are still confused as to what is a healthy diet? Like, what does it look like? Because you have people, especially in this space, this functional medicine space, they're arguing over which healthy, relatively whole food-based diet is better and missing the point. We've circled the wagons and we're shooting in instead of saying, hey, who should be putting our time and attention against the processed food industry, who continues to essentially poison us with foods and tell how good it is and how safe it is, or how healthy it is and how great it is. And at the same time, full well, many of these companies and organizations know that the food is definitely contributing to the problem with the processed oils, excessive sugars, and everything, and toxins that are in them. So how would you define what a healthy diet? If somebody said just what a healthy diet looks like, what would be a kind of a general explanation of a healthy diet from your perspective?
I think I love the dialogue around trying to unify a message around food nutrition, but I think that it's not that simple. It's not that. I think the personalized medicine, personalized nutrition is really where we need to be focusing our attention. Even from my perspective, when I'm working with patients with incredible inflammation, SIBO, IBD, IBS, what works for one patient in any given stage of their healing journey is going to be very different than what works for another patient. And I think that personalization is what's really missing in the conversation about food and nutrition right now, or at least it's under discussed. In general, I think because of the way that our in the United States, how our food system is working, I would say it's better to choose foods as close to their natural form as possible and as close to your home as possible, because the farther away you, and as seasonally as possible, because I think we've commoditized food, we've politicized food. The farther you get away from your home and from real foods that you can identify where they've been grown, the less likely they're going to have the nutrients that you need, the more likely they've been processed in a way that's going to be toxic or inflammatory to your system. So yes, I am a huge proponent of people eating more plants. I think that, and that's actually not because animal proteins have no place in a healthy diet. I absolutely think that animal proteins have a place in a healthy diet. I don't think it should be I don't agree with it being the main staple of a diet. I think it's a supplementary part of a diet. But the problem with animals in our country is that we're raising them terribly too. We're treating them terribly. We're pumping them full of antibiotics. We're not giving them the diets that they need, and that's trickling into our bodies as well when we consume them, right? So there's a lot of similar impacts on animal proteins. And again, if you can find the right farmers and the right people, the right local people to that you know and trust, and you know where their food is coming from, it's a completely different conversation. So I think for the average person, it's about trying to focus as closely as you can to foods in their natural form, foods that are as seasonal as possible, because the more in season something is, not only the cheaper it is, but the more nutrients you're going to get from that food. And, focusing on adjusting your diet as you go through your own healing process, because your body will change. And I think that's the thing that people think like, oh, this has worked for me and it's going to continue to be this perfect for me or work for me. That does not happen, especially when you're focused on a healing protocol. Your body's going to change and it's going to adjust, and you might accept better nutrients better 3 months down the line than you are today, just simply by personalizing your approach and your protocol. So,
yeah. So I would agree with the fact that we should foods as close to the way they came out of the water, walk the earth,
yeah.
came off the tree, out of the ground. That's the best bet, right? And so I think you want to eat whole food based meal. I agree. If you can grow it, grow it. If you can buy it locally, farmer, try and do that. Try and buy in season, because we'll probably get into this as we talk more plants. The big argument against plants is that they all have toxin. A lot of plants are most toxic when they're not mature. And oftentimes in these mass farms, they're picked when they're not, and then they're force ripened, and that leads to maybe a greater level of toxicity plant. I don't think plants are all bad per the carnivore community. They have toxins. I think there's a beneficial effect of having plants have some that stimulate the immune system in the GI tract, because that's how we strengthen the immune system of the GI tract, is to eat those things. But I think for additional purposes, for the listeners, a whole food based diet is and eating locally and eating in season. I would agree with all of that stuff. That's a great place to start. Regarding the different dietary religions out there, vegan, vegetarian, carnivore, paleo, keto, like there's a billion of these things. I think they all potentially have benefit at certain times.
Yeah.
Because when we switch from one diet to another diet, it changes our microbiome. It can change what's going on in the immune inflammatory state. And so they're all potentially beneficial to change what's happening in the gut and change the bacterial content.
Sure.
But some of the people that I see that are sometimes the sickest are the people that have been on a restrictive diet for an extended period of time. vegans and vegetarians included, because they're more restricted. They're not getting to the key micronutrients, maybe amino acids, because they're not doing them well. And they're
Yes.
restricted. And they think, I think because it created, as you said, a short-term change that this is going to be my lifestyle forever. And it usually doesn't work out that way.
Not the case.
So because I think you definitely believe in a plant-based or a plant-based diet. I don't necessarily disagree with that. But there's pros and cons, right? You talked about the like meat and the meat or animal-based protein as from a toxicity point, like the way we raise it, the way antibiotics and everything else.
Right.
We can make this statement from a plant-based side of things too, because how plants are, what they're with, the chemicals that are used, oftentimes mass farming, and they're efficient. So let's talk about the pros and potential the cons of, let's talk about first, what does that mean, a plant diet? And then let's talk about pros and cons.
I lost you for that last bit. How that means on a plant-based or an animal-based diet.
So somebody might say, well, what is a plant? What does that mean? Plant-based nutrition or plant-based diet. So what is that? And then pros and cons.
Yeah. Okay. So in my world, and I again live in a very longevity heavy world where not just living longer, but living healthier and healthier bodies. The science that we've not only, so I work for a company called L-Nutra, and the science that we're developing here at our company, but also within the landscape of longevity is plants tend to, well, first of all, they tend to not accelerate the aging process and cellular aging specifically as much as plant-based or animal-based proteins and animal-based products. And we'll get into that in a second. But when I talk about plants, I mean, you are focusing on things like, and I know this is a thyroid specific audience and thyroid podcast, so I want to actually talk about this for a little bit if we want to, but plant-based proteins like beans, legumes, tofu, tempeh, edamame, would be all sources of proteins that you could get on a plant-based diet. Nuts and seeds are hugely important. You have lots of fats, healthy oils like extra virgin olive oil, avocados, things like that. And then from a carbohydrate perspective, you're focused on real whole grains like amaranth, quinoa, even brown rice, wild rice, things like that, or starchy vegetables like sweet potatoes and so on and so forth. That being said, though, you did nail it earlier that one of the things I see in my practice is people love the idea of being vegan vegetarian, but don't love the idea of actually doing it well. And you can go to Trader Joe's and buy all of their snack products that are vegan vegetarian and live off of, lentil curlies and and some vegan cheese if you wanted to, and that's going to be just as toxic as being only eating meat and nothing else, right? So there absolutely we need to understand that we have to play a big role in how well we execute the diets that we're on, and being aware that at some point, I'm actually pregnant right now. And I am eating more animal proteins than I've ever eaten because I know that is what my body needs right now. And I've had to adjust based on my life stage. So and not to say that you couldn't do this vegan vegetarian, but for my body, it is, and for the amount of protein that I needed to consume, or I need to consume on a daily basis, it simply wasn't possible for me to do it on the plant-based diet that I'm used to. So I had to make that shift, right? So you have to adjust your diet based on where you are, and being open-minded about that is really important. So I don't know if I answered your question or not, but I kind of opened the door to a lot of conversations. We can take it.
Yeah. So I think when we think plant-based, for the listener, what we're talking about is kind of the bulk of what you're eating is plant-based, and the meat or the animal protein
It's supplementary.
Is more supplementary to the meal. It's not a piece. Whereas somebody who's maybe definitely somebody who's more carnivore oriented, the animal protein may be the main component of the meal, and plants would have a small percentage.
That's a great summary. Yes.
And I think that even we're seeing in the carnivore community that they're all starting to make that shift and change and realize, this was helpful to help with my immune and inflammatory system, change the gut biome a bit. But it's not necessarily the best long term. And you see them bringing in more whole plants and honey and things like that
Right.
that are whole food based. So, we're back to what we started to begin with. Like a whole food based diet is probably the best.
And the concept of balancing.
Yeah, well, we have a tough time with that sometimes, right?
We,
So let's talk of the plant based diets, right? Two biggies: vegetarianism, right? Veganism. There's others. Can you want to outline the big plant-based diets and maybe the differences between them so people understand what they are?
Sure. Well, veganism's avoiding anything that comes from an animal, including dairy, including honey, including any derivatives of eggs, anything like that. So they're strictly plants. I find that to be I follow a version when I'm not in my current state of life. I follow a version of vegan only because my body does not tolerate casein, which is a protein in milk. So I have to avoid milk. But I'm kind of teeter between. I guess I'll call myself a flexitarian then, because I teeter between I'm no dairy, I do eat eggs, and I have animal proteins a couple times a month. And fish maybe once a week. So there's elements of all the diets that I consume in my particular world. But veganism is no animals or animal byproducts at all, period. And some vegans that are a little bit less strict will have honey because that one seems a little bit that one still kind of befuddles me on the honey side. But anyway, vegetarianism, you are just avoiding the actual animal proteins. So you can have eggs, you can have cheese, you can have dairy, but you're not eating things like chicken or beef or any of that. So I would say that you have more flexibility nutritionally from a vegetarian perspective to get things like omega-3s and other nutrients from animal-based products, but you're still missing the animal proteins itself. So you still risk, protein not getting under eating protein, not getting enough B12. And sometimes if you're really not following a strict or not following a well-balanced vegan or vegetarian diet, you're definitely going to be low in omega-3s and things like that as well. So you will definitely find nutritional deficiencies there if you're not careful.
Yeah, I think the biggest challenge that I see in the people that come see me that say they're vegan or vegetarian is they are carbitarians.
Carbitarians, yeah.
Yeah, they're just eating lots of processed carbohydrates, right?
Yep.
Because it says vegetarian or vegan on it, so
Yep.
they eat it. They don't realize that the 27 ingredients in there are that they can't pronounce are probably
Super toxic.
yeah, not too healthy. The other issue I think is when we think about um, the challenges with the plant-based diet is one of the things you said. If you're going to do it and do it well and get sufficient amounts of protein, and I have patients that are really good at it and do a great job, but you've got to be really conscious of what you're eating to make sure you're getting those things in. You've got to have a lot of diversity, and people doesn't matter what diet they follow, they'll lose the diversity over time. They eat the same 7 dinners every week, same 7 lunches, same 7 breakfasts. So you got to do a better job in being aware of what you're eating to make sure you're getting all the things that you need to get. And especially when it comes to protein, and there's a big argument about how much protein we actually need. There's lots of debates, but for some people, the volume of protein that they may need on a vegetarian diet can really create a challenge with volume. Like I got to eat a lot of stuff potentially to meet my macro needs. And so that could be a challenge too, I think. But I think the one thing that you did say, I think is probably important to explain to the listeners is what was your thought process or thinking behind, okay, the diet I'm following is fine, but now that I'm pregnant, it's no longer good enough and I need to add stuff back. Somebody might be thinking, Well, if it
Why?
wasn't good enough when you were not pregnant, or if it's not good enough for when you are pregnant, what made it good enough when you weren't pregnant?
It's a great question. And yes. Okay. So let's dive into the two main reasons why I made the shift in this stage of my life. One is that there are certain nutrient sensing pathways in our body that are growth hormone pathways. Three main ones that we track here at my company are IGF-1, mTOR, and PKA. From a longevity perspective, so on the one hand, and this is such a wonderful forum to be talking about this, because on the one hand, if you understimulate your growth pathways, you're going to be accelerating aging because you don't have the muscle mass that you need. You're not going to have the amino acids and proteins to repair your body properly. So people who are under eating protein are actually inadvertently accelerating their cellular aging too, right? So we need growth. We need IGF-1, mTOR, PK to be accelerated, especially at certain stages of our life, including young childhood and adolescence, when we're growing bodies, we're growing brains, we're growing organs, we're ramping up our hormones. We need a lot more, between the ages of 0 and 18. We actually need quite a bit more after 65, the age of 65, because we need to maintain our lean body mass, and having more protein at an older age actually helps to maintain longevity, because we're maintaining muscle mass and so on and so forth. But there's this interesting spot between the ages of 18 and 65 for the average person. And I put a massive asterisk next to that, because if you're ill, if you have a certain condition, there's lots of reasons why you need to adjust and fluctuate your specific needs throughout your lifespan. But generally speaking, from the ages of 18 and 65, getting adequate protein is great. Having too little is not great. Having too much is also not great in terms of accelerating cellular aging and impacting the potential onset of chronic disease. So the lower protein in that span of time is actually better for health span and longevity, according to the research that we're finding. But again, not no protein. We need enough, but we don't want too much, is kind of the point that I'm trying to make. But the other very unique scenario that I'm in right now is that I am growing a body. I am growing a body inside my body that needs growth factor to be turned on in a bigger way. This is one of the very unique situations in life that I need more IGF-1. I need more mTOR to be activated, and it's very hard to do. And I need more protein in general. So I'm taking a step back from where I was in my maintaining longevity status to I'm growing a human inside my body, and I need these things. I need to accelerate the triggering of these growth pathways. So I need more of it. And also, as you kind of alluded to earlier, even though actually I think of the protein that you get from plant-based sources, you're probably absorbing about 75% versus like 90% from animal sources. But when you're pregnant, depending on where you are and how well you're tolerating it, it can be very hard to eat a lot of food, and you want to just make the food that you're eating really, really nutrient dense. So for me, just going straight for the fish and the chicken and the beef is going to be a lot easier than me trying to have 2 cups of chickpeas in a big salad that is going to make me fill up, and I might not actually get that protein that I need. So I hope that answered your question, but it's just a stage of life. And I would say that, if you're recovering from illness, if you have, I have a lot of my patients with IBS and IBD need more protein because they're repairing their microbiome. So there's different phases. You need to understand where you are and what your body needs. And for me right now, it's more protein.
Yeah, I would agree. We're all an end of one, and we got to kind of figure things out. But I think people need to understand that there's sometimes greater demand for things in a change that's needed when we're going through different phases of our life. Yeah. You're in a stage where you're trying to develop a child and grow a child, and so there's needs that go beyond what your basic needs are. So you're making those changes. Let's talk protein a bit, because this is a really controversial subject, and it sounds like you guys have done some work on this. But you'll hear generally that a person should consume about 0.7 to 1.2 grams of protein per pound of body weight or lean body mass, in general, let's say body weight, ideal body weight. What have you found in regard to that? Because some people are, everybody needs to be eating a gram of protein per pound of per pound of ideal body weight. Other people are saying it can be much lower. Obviously, there's different phases of our life, but what's the general recommendations that you provide for somebody who's relatively healthy, mid 40s, male or female? How do you help them understand what their calories and macros should look like? Some people say calories don't matter. Some people say macros don't matter. So what's your take on all of that?
So it's actually not per pound, which is so funny. We're the only country in the world that uses that metric. It's actually per kilogram. So between the ages of 18 and 65, and this is again when we want to slow the aging process. So I'm just going to focus on this because most of us fall into this camp, I think, listening to this podcast probably. You want to reduce the rate of aging, cellular aging during this particular stage of life. So it's actually 0.8 grams per kilogram of body weight that you need. So for a 150-pound person, you would take 150 divided by 2.2. That would give you your kilograms. That's 68 kilograms. And then 0.8 for that. So that would be about 55 grams of protein a day. And that's to, and I want to be very clear that is to maintain your physiological protein needs. So if you are sitting around not lifting weights, not, doing all of these other additional things physically, 55 grams for a 150-pound person is what you would need to, at a bare minimum, to maintain your body's optimal state. That changes if you are physically active in our world. So if you are a runner or a body lifter, or you're very active, then you can go up to 1 gram per kilogram. So if you, again, for a 150-pound person, that would be about 70 grams of protein a day. And then for the outliers, the 18 and under and the 65 and over, that increases up to about 1.2 grams per kilogram a day because of the increased needs that you have of protein. So I definitely think, and here's a quick food for thought for you. I would love your opinion on it, or what, if you've heard this before, but we're talking about the nutrient sensing pathways again. People who, and I think this is a really important message for people who think that, especially with the advent of and the increase of metabolic conditions in our country, like heart disease, high LDL, high blood cholesterol, diabetes, things like this. So we focus a lot on carbohydrates, and we focus a lot on sugars as being one of the main culprits of these diseases being a problem. And that's IGF-1, that nutrient sensing pathway IGF-1, that's the primary player in that. But if you look at the physiology of how mTOR works in the body, the downstream effect of triggering mTOR is actually triggering IGF-1 as well. So people who are completely keto and they still have high cholesterol, high LDL, and or are pre-diabetic and don't understand why, because they're avoiding all carbohydrates, it's because of the amount of, there's a lot of people, and I'm sure I'm going to break hearts. I'm used to breaking hearts this way, but we are eating too much protein. We are eating too much protein. And I think that it's probably because of the lack of understanding between pounds versus kilograms and so on and so forth. But you can still get diabetes by being on a keto diet. And that's simply by the physiology of how those nutrient sensing pathways work together in our body.
Yeah, but I would say that there's a whole bunch of people that are eating way more protein than that and are doing that, feel and function and do really well on a high protein animal-based diet. So it can't be as simple as, okay, high protein is bad, it's still going to create those issues. And we could make the same argument that there's a whole bunch of people with diabetes and high cholesterol and high triglycerides who are on a vegetarian and vegan diet. I see them in my practice. So I think I agree with you where the amount of protein is going to be based on needs, right? And yes, some of the literature says kilogram. There's a lot of discussion about grams per pound of lean body mass. What's right? I think that, again, it comes down to the individual, but we can make arguments one way or the other. Like you see the people that are strictly carnivore, lab's good, everything else is good.
Too. It depends on your goals too, right? I mean, I've said this to a lot of patients. I was like, if you're talking to me, my goal is longevity. That's not always, and I feel like people think that that's like everyone's goal. It's actually not. There's people that really want to look a particular way, or to, they have very specific goals in mind. That's going to also change what you're saying, what advice you should be taking based on what you're actually aiming for. So I also think that that's something to be noted, is that yes, everyone has different needs, but also really understanding what your goal is for your health and for your nutrition is going to make a big impact on which advice you take.
So from a thyroid perspective, a lot of people who get diagnosed with hypothyroidism, get diagnosed with Hashimoto's, have other autoimmune disorders, are put on like an anti-inflammatory autoimmune protocol. And one of the things that's removed quite a bit is a lot of different plant-based foods, nuts, seeds, all those things. So what's your standpoint for the thyroid community or people that go on these anti-inflammatory autoimmune based diets in regard to, are the things that they're removing truly problematic, or is this maybe a thing that they don't need to do if they have immune and inflammatory issues going on? Or let's ask it that way.
Yeah. I think that people have different sensitivities to certain types of cruciferous vegetables, depending on how hypersensitive they are, and what types of IgG responses, inflammatory responses they're having. So I do think that it's helpful in my practice to do comprehensive specialty laboratory testing to kind of test IgG responses in certain guts, and this is another play for the AIP diet. The idea of the AIP diet can be really helpful for just resetting the system at first, right? So if you're highly inflamed, you are really struggling, doing an AIP diet and really just cutting out a lot of these things is going to probably make you feel better more quickly than, kind of playing the elimination re-auditioning game right away, because people are exhausted. People are so tired when they're in a really acute phase like that. So I do like the AIP diet as just like, hey, while we figure out what's going on with your unique body, do this thing, because you're probably going to have, and not to say that all foods on the AIP diet work for everyone either. So that's again, nothing is going to be universally true for everyone, but it's important to understand that that's probably a good place to start if you're really, really, really in a bad place. From there, I think it's important to figure out what your specific sensitivities are in that moment. I love IgG food sensitivity testing for that reason, because it does give us a compass, at least for the short term, on what foods are going to be triggering to you and what foods are not going to be triggering to your unique system in that moment. But from a thyroid perspective, as a gut health specialist, I always start with the gut, because what's happening in the gut is impacting everything else. So the more specialized you can get in healing your gut, the more likely at some point you can bring these foods back in and they won't cause as much of trouble for you as they may in an acute situation, right? So you have to and it takes time. It takes months for your gut to get back into a place where the gut lining, the junctures are tighter, and you have more butyrate to really nourish all of those elements of your microbiome, and you're inoculating with the good bacteria, hopefully getting rid of the mold and the yeast and the parasites and the things like that are maybe causing extra problems. And then eventually, you can have cauliflower and broccoli and all of these kind of more, or even legumes that have more phytates and things, and you don't have as much of a problem with them eventually. But when you're highly inflamed, I do like the a version of the AIP diet, just because it gives people relief right away, because it is pretty stringent and it is pretty tailored to kind of reducing that inflammation. But I don't think that everyone is going to have, not everyone with an autoimmune condition or specifically Hashimoto's in the case that you just asked about, is going to respond the same way to plants. And I do think that there's a huge element of preparation, how you're preparing your foods too, that I don't think is as discussed either, that should be. You shouldn't just be going and getting lentils from, I'm not trying to hate on Trader Joe's. I like Trader Joe's, but you shouldn't just be going to get lentils from Trader Joe's and then preparing them that way. I mean, it's better to soak them for 24, 48 hours, get rid of those phytates, get those oxalates as far down as possible. Then that's not going to have the same effect on your body as, an underprepared legume, or eating a raw salad. Heck no, I would never give my gut patients raw salads right away if they're in an acute situation. Cook your veggies, cook off those those oxalates and phytates and things like that to help allow your body to accept them better, right? So there's lots of things about preparation too that I think are really important when it comes to food.
I think the anti-inflammatory diet is a great place to start. But it may not be the place to start for everybody. If you've already done 2 or 3 anti-inflammatory diets, then it's probably not the thing to do, right? Any switch in a diet can be really helpful just to create some change in the gut, maybe even something like an elemental nutrition shake, so that you give your gut a rest. But I think for the listeners, it's really important. We made up all this stuff, like all these diets. We just kind of made these up as generalizations. So it doesn't mean they're in concrete, like, oh, this food is bad for everybody with an anti-inflammatory or with an immune-driven condition. We just made it up. It was a generalization that we made up, that we said, hey, these are the foods that can potentially be most problematic for people. So these are the things to remove. But that's why you see lots of different versions of an AIP based diet, because everybody says, well, I don't think that needs to be the case, or I did this and I ate that, and so it was okay. So I'm going to make my AIP diet. This is what I'm going to promote as an AIP diet. This is the modern one, or this is this. So I think we have to consider that sometimes the purpose when somebody has got chronic health issues, I do believe, as you do, that a lot of stuff starts at the gut. So everything's got to go in through the gut. Everything's got to come out through the gut. So we got to have a healthier GI tract. So I think any diet could be good. And the other thing we hear sometimes in this space is that there are vegetables that are potentially goitrogenic and can create damage to the thyroid gland, and people with thyroid conditions should stay away from them. What have you learned about that? I have my opinion, but I'll let you give your side if you want to, and then we'll see where we're at on that.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was alluding to before, is that I don't have a ton of Hashimoto's patients, but I do have patients with eosinophilic esophagitis. I have patients with rheumatoid arthritis. I have lots of other types of autoimmune patients in my practice. And I haven't seen the same stark contrast between certain foods, especially with those cruciferous vegetables like we were talking about. And I think part of it is because, well, I think the argument is that they can exacerbate an inflammatory response if you're already inflamed. That's true. And it can be true for certain people, but I don't think that it's I struggle myself with adopting the all or nothing mentality when it comes to certain foods like that, because I do think that everybody is different. There's probably other inflammatory foods that need to go first. I would say that there's we talked about processed foods, we talk about sugar, we talk about all these different types of foods that should absolutely be going first before broccoli or cauliflower or what have you. But in my opinion, I think it's entirely personalization. It's entirely preparation, and it's about putting yourself in a position with a educated practitioner who can guide you on how to introduce a food so you can properly understand the reaction your body's having. I think that's the other thing too, is that when especially for an autoimmune patient, if you if you are navigating the food scene, you need time. You need at least it takes 72 hours before a food is fully finished going through its cycle in your body. So when you're trialing something, like say you've been on the AIP diet for, a month or 2 weeks to a month, or however long you've been on it, and you've reset your body, you're mostly neutralized, you're feeling good, and you want to start adding some of these more problematic things with phytates or goitrogens in it, you do one intro of a broccoli or whatever, in 2 times in a day. So maybe for breakfast and lunch, you do the same intro, the same food, and then you wait 48 to 72 hours, let it fully pass through your body, give your body time to actually give you any response. Because a lot of people's responses is not immediate, but that way you can actually tell, and you will actually be getting a much better read on whether that food did impact your body. And if it didn't, if you had no fatigue, joint pain, headaches, whatever, then you can assume, or however your body is responding, you can pretty much safely assume that that's a safe food for you. So I think it's also about, I love the AIP diet for that. It primes you for proper introduction of foods, like so you can actually start to tell. Realistically, it's a long process. Don't get me wrong. When I do food introductions and things like that with my patients, you're in the first month to 6 weeks is challenging because you're working with a pretty small amount of foods. But I do think it's really important to introduce them correctly so that you can actually get a proper read on whether or not these foods work for you.
So I'd say point one, from what I've read, the most recent literature, the whole cruciferous vegetable thing creating problems at the thyroid gland has been disproven. So I think people have to worry less about that component of it. But yes,
hooray!
If you got gut-based issues going on, right? Cook your vegetables, help break them down. I think that's important. The second part where you were talking about food reintroduction, I want to touch on that quickly, because I agree that a lot of times people do this way too fast. They try something in a day and then they go, okay, I didn't have a problem. That's going to be okay. And my food reintroductions may be even a little bit different from yours, but I tend to do like a 3-3-1 food reintroduction. So 3 days in a row, I will have them eat increasing doses of the food. Day one, a very small dose. If they have a problem, don't just stop, right?
Sure.
Next day, have 2 servings of that food. Next day, 3 servings of that food. And then don't eat anything, eat it for 3 days. And then let's see what you notice, because it does take about 72 hours for immune response. But I go one step further. If they didn't notice any difference, then I'll have them eat a good hearty dose of that again on day 7. And that's when sometimes that's the real telling point. I think the immune system sometimes, depending on how long that food's been gone, the immune system may start to react to it, but not get to that peak where they really have a response. And so then hitting them with another dose again after that break, if they don't have any symptoms, hey, you're probably great. You can put that food back in. But then I see a lot of my patients go on that 7th day. They're like, whoa, what happened? I didn't notice that. You probably were starting to get some of that immune reaction, but it didn't hit to threshold. And that last day, you kind of pushed yourself over threshold. I don't know how that sits for you. Tends to be how I do it, because I see a lot of people come in like, yeah, I did. My doctor just said to add 1 food a day. And if I didn't have a problem, then it'd be good. And then they're 3 weeks later, they're back to all this food reactivity. And they're like, I don't even know what to eat anymore.
Yeah. I think your approach is really interesting. My only reaction to it, and I tend to be a practitioner that I pride myself on being as empowering and sustainable for people as possible, meeting people where they're at. And I think that my patients tend to really struggle with how slow that process is. And just the amount, if I went any slower than how I currently do it, I think I would lose them. I think I would probably lose people in the process, and I'm trying to avoid that. And I do think that they're having a hefty dose twice, 2 intros in a day, I've found has been enough to be able to read it. But you do need to wait those 3 days 100%, because inevitably, even though I'll have a patient that tried eggs and like, oh, I'm doing really great, end of day 2, I'm still doing great. And then the next day they wake up with a massive headache and they're like laid out with a headache. I'm like, well, you didn't do so great with that eggs actually. Yeah, I like that. I think you bring up a good point though, that it does take your body time to respond from an IgG immune response, especially if you're eating a large portion of those things. But I also come from the camp of how often are you going to eat that much of that food? And is there a world in which you can balance out, if you have a general read of how your body's going to respond to a particular food, then knowledge is power. Now you can go, like, I categorize them as green, yellow, and red foods. So if something is passed, it's green. If it's yellow, it's like I had some reaction, but it's like not putting me on my ass. I'm have a little bit of gas, or I'm having whatever. Red is headaches, joint pain, diarrhea, constipation, whatever those responses are. But if you know what your response is, now you can make the choice, and now you're not going to be surprised, right? So if you make a choice to go and have a massive cheese pizza and some ice cream, when you know that dairy is a red food for you, you're not going to be surprised in 3 days when you're still not feeling well, right? So I feel like that's kind of the approach that I take with my patients. It's like, yes, I want you to heal, and also I want you to have the knowledge of how your body works so that you can be the person that decides, and not surprised when you come back and have this issue. You're not thinking something's massively wrong. So I don't know, a little bit of a similar but different philosophy. But
I think we're on the same page. Because I tell my patients, very similar things. Like, I think some people try to be perfect with their diet. Like, I'm only ever going to eat these 17 foods so that I can maintain perfect health. And my philosophy is that the drive to be perfect is so stressful. It's probably creating more problems for you than having that piece of chocolate cake.
Let's talk about it. Let's talk about it.
80% of the time, good habits, 20% of the time, bad behavior probably makes people happy in the long run.
Sure.
But 100% trying to be perfect, I just think creates too much stress for people. But I'm in full agreement. Like, okay, you react to gluten. Don't do that very often. Right?
Yeah.
Like, and there's going to be potential consequences, and then do these things when you get to consume it so that you're not having a long-term struggle afterwards.
Right. Or, just getting to know your body so well that you're not, because I have a lot of patients, the patients that I see in my practice are at their wits' end. They've done everything and they are in a bad way. And it's also a matter of building back their confidence within their own bodies, right? To know that their bodies are capable of healing, to know that they're not, malfunctioning humans. They're just in a state of particular imbalance, and we can get them there. But I think that so anyway, it breeds the people that I see, they tend to veer a little bit more on the anxiety, on the hypochondriac realm of the world. And it's kind of teaching people to relearn how to be calm and relax. And that does stress around food, stress around your health. Oh my gosh, stress alone. If you had the most perfect diet in the world, stress alone, whether it's coming from your brain or from external environments, is enough to impact your gut lining and tear holes in your gut lining. And suddenly you have, all of these gut issues regardless. So stress is massive in this world. So it is a matter of building confidence back up in people being able to rely on their bodies and feel confident in their bodies too. Right. So body literacy in my practice is huge.
Yeah. I think I talk to patients about that all the time. Like, if you're on your 15th physician and you've done your 27th gut protocol, your gut is the side effect of some other real or perceived stress. And a lot of it lies in between the 6 inches of your ears, because you trained your brain and your limbic system that everything's going to hurt you, kill you, damage you. And when you're in fear of multiple things, that winds up your limbic system. And then your sympathetic nervous system is upregulated. Your parasympathetic nervous system is downregulated. You're not making appropriate levels of stomach acid, bile's not flowing appropriately, pancreatic output goes down, right? We really start to lose all ability to really break down and digest food appropriately. And then we shouldn't be shocked that we have multiple systems that are failing. It's one of the things I talk about in my book and I talk about on the podcast a lot is we have people come to see us, you, me, others, and they think they have a thyroid condition, and then they think they have a pre-diabetic condition, and I have a PCOS issue, and I have a gut issue, and and they think they have different conditions. Like these are separate, different conditions, which is very allopathic.
Unrelated.
Right. And so what I try and get people to understand is you have a whole body that communicates with each other. What you have is typically a chronic inflammatory condition going on because of an excessive load of stressors on the physiology that's changed your system from homeostatic regulation to allostatic regulation. I try and use nicer terms, but because we're talking on the podcast. And when there's this shift in physiology from homeostasis to allostasis or defensive physiology, you should expect almost every system to be altered. Your sex hormones, of course, they're going to be downregulated. Gut physiology, of course, it's going to be downregulated. I can't sleep. No wonder. You should be that way, because if you were being chased by a tiger, you wouldn't stop to have sex. You wouldn't stop to take a nap. You wouldn't stop to cook a meal. You'd be alert, awake, constantly on the run, right? And in a kind of constant anxious state.
Yeah. Also, running away from the bear means that your body is downregulating all of your digestive juices because they want all of the free floating blood, the glucose, to be in your blood so that you can actually have the energy to run away. So if you're constantly in a stress mode, you aren't going to be at all, you're basically stopping the digestive process in order for you to run away. So in that, our body has no ability to differentiate a lion from, a test or a meeting that we have, or a hard conversation with a friend. We have no ability to differentiate between those two. So yeah, the CNS system is massive. And I think that in my world too, I think it's important to note that what's happening between your ears and in your brain, and what we conjure up, the anxiety that we conjure up, can be stemming from the gut saying something's wrong too. I think that yes, we all need to work on our consciousness and our mental balance. But if your gut's unwell, if your second brain is unwell, you might be feeling that way because that's your gut telling you something's not right, something's unwell and imbalanced. So sometimes,
even if you don't have GI symptoms, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Absolutely.
Because I think that's important, because a lot of people say, well, I don't have a gut issue. I just have depression, or I just have anxiety, or I just have, yeah, but where do those neurotransmitters generate a lot of those things?
Yeah.
We're absorbing those micronutrients that become those neurotransmitters, right? So you could have significant gut-based issues and have no GI-based symptoms.
Yeah. And also I would take it one step further. Most of the time when I'm having initial patient consults with people, I have to really dive in because a lot of people have no idea what's normal either. In terms of digestion and feeling good in their body. Like, I think I would say the people that do are very few and far between. I have to really dive into some pretty TMI situations with people, like, well, I need you to tell me exactly what that looks like and how it feels when it comes out, and all of these things to really understand if it's normal or not.
I think people are shocked sometimes when I tell them how many bowel movements per day is normal, and they're like, per day? I don't even have that per week, right?
But and yet those are the same people that say they don't have digestive issues.
Right. Yeah, I don't have digestive issues. Okay, so you're passing 1 to 3 bananas per day, banana-sized bowel movements per day? No, I don't even do that in a week. Okay, then you have a gut issue, right?
You have a gut issue.
But they'll say it's normal. That's why I've always been. Okay, well, then you've always been messed up with your GI tract, so we need to fix it.
So your neurotransmitters have never been producing well. Right. So the fact you've had anxiety since you were a teen makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
And I think there's, I want to touch base on something called short chain fatty acids. And with your skill set, you probably know what that is. And we can talk about what the importance and significance of that is to the immune system. But I want to touch base on this real quickly, because we talked about the stress perception in my world, especially because vast majority of my patients are people that have poorly regulated thyroid physiology and are struggling in both the allopathic and the functional medicine models. Um, and people use the term autoimmunity. I hate that term because I think it puts people in a place where they believe their own immune system is attacking them for no
Against them,
apparent reason.
100%.
And that sets the stage for stress and anxiety right off the bat, right? I can't heal and recover. My immune system's lost control. And I don't believe that's the case in most situations. I think the immune system is trying to protect us from something. Even when it comes to Hashimoto's and thyroiditis, the immune system doesn't go to the thyroid gland, in my opinion, based on the literature, willy-nilly and just say, you know what, I don't recognize that thyroid tissue anymore. I think it's
Right.
actively driven to slow down the thyroid hormone production because people that are in excessive stress, the adaptive response at the cellular level is the reduced conversion of T4 to T3 to slow down the metabolism, to ramp up defense. So I see the whole thyroiditis thing in most patients isn't broken physiology. It's an adaptive downregulation, and
Right.
plenty of papers. And now there's more and more papers saying, wait a minute, hypothyroidism is a protective response against cancer. So if you think about that, like, wait a second, if all these
Thank you,
people are
body.
developing hypothyroidism and now we are providing them with thyroid medication without trying to figure out why the body was adaptively downplaying it, do we increase the risk of developing pathologies
Sure.
because we rushed in way too early with something that they may not have needed ever to have had? And I did a podcast a couple episodes ago with a um, clinical chemist, and based on the literature and the paper that we were discussing there, it was like 70 to 80% of the people on thyroid hormone were put on it inappropriately. 70
Mm-hmm.
to 80% based on the literature. And I agree because I see it all the time. But you
Wild.
think about that's the top 1 to 3 drugs every year,
Mm-hmm.
potentially 70 to 80% inappropriately treated. Man, what kind of problems are we causing by just not addressing root issues and identifying that many times what's going on in the body is the response to the excessive stress load and not the problem, right? We don't feel it, those symptoms don't make us feel good. And I understand we want to get rid of them, but we rush in like, oh, let's optimize the blood levels of T4 and T3 instead of saying, hey, that is the adaptive response. Or,
Right.
hey, there's inflammation in the gut. Well, let's suppress the inflammation. Okay, well, maybe the inflammation is there
They're
to
cleaning up.
protect, right?
Yeah. It's
So
their
we don't
cleaning
want
up.
it out of control, but we also don't want to globally suppress the immune system either. So I just wanted to get that piece out for the listeners. Short chain fatty acids. I'm sure you have some familiarity with the significance
Yeah.
of these. And we can
Yeah.
talk about the significance of them, what they are, what the significance is for the integrity of the GI tract, for the regulation of the immune system. So, do you mind going into that a little bit? Like, what are short chain fatty acids? How do we get them? And what do they do in general?
So short chain fat, we have, I mean, it's decently easy to understand that there's short chain, medium chain, and long chain fatty acids. They come from fat. And they play a pretty significant role in gut health because they're one of the only. So I'll give you a very shorthand digestive physiology moment here. Proteins and carbohydrates are directly enter the blood from the gut when they're digested and when they're ready to go. Long chain fatty acids have to go through the lymphatic system because they're just too large. They have to bypass the gut to go through a different system. They pluck out by near the heart in one of the valves by the heart, and then they have to go through the liver and do that whole process, and then they get into the bloodstream. Hence, part of the reason why fats keep you full for a long period of time is just much longer digestion process. But short chain fatty acids are particularly wonderful because they can bypass the blood-brain barrier and goes directly into the bloodstream and actually provide the nutrients for the gut lining to really nourish it and to allow it to recultivate and to populate, especially for people like with leaky gut or whatever, inflammatory bowel disease, you name it. So it's important to have short chain fatty acids in your diet so that you can get that benefit of not having to, the gut benefits of them rather than just the nutritional benefits of getting the longer form fatty acids in the diet. Does that make sense? So it's basically like short chain fatty acids are quick fuel for our gut, allows our gut to really get quick acting nutrients from really potent sources. Instead, you won't be getting those from longer chain fats in our diet. Okay. And they do in that way can have an anti-inflammatory effect because we're feeding our gut and helping to basically modulate the immune response, reduce inflammation in the gut. And it really does help quite a bit with people with IBD, Crohn's disease, ulcerative colitis, that type of thing.
So let's talk about this in context of plants and plant-based foods and how gut flora might utilize those fibers to potentially generate short-chain fatty acids. So
yeah, and you need those gut flora to be able to actually produce the short-chain fatty acids. So yes, certain bacteria in our gut, when they consume fibrous foods, insoluble fiber from vegetables, grains, what have you, from plant-based sources, they actually can, short-chain fatty acids are a byproduct of what they produce when they feed. And that is what can help to cultivate a healthier gut microbiome. You can also get, in a sense, you're actually, by feeding your gut the right foods, the right
some
gut,
plant-based foods,
yes,
here, right? So this
when
is
you're
right
feeding
up your
the
alley.
right bacteria, the right types of foods, then they're able to actually produce the byproduct of short chain fatty acids that can then help to bypass your gut brain barrier, gives you more, all the things that are really helpful for, I would say actually helping to heal your gut, but also to solve a lot of symptoms related to autoimmune issues like low energy, mental, brain fog, sleep issues, all of that sort of thing.
So I'm going to kind of just summarize some of that at the end. So we're talking about the importance of plant and plant-based foods. Those plants typically have soluble and insoluble fibers, and that can feed bacteria. And as we just kind of discussed, you have to have the right types of bacteria, and there's specific types of probiotics that you can utilize to help kind of nurture this. But by eating some of these plant-based foods, we provide food for the bacteria. The bacteria produces the short-chain fatty acids, and the short-chain fatty acids play a really significant role. And the reason this is really important for the people with immune-driven conditions, chronic inflammatory issues, is that the short-chain fatty acids, butyrate is probably the one that gets most of the attention and most of the love. It's like your good-looking sister or something, right? Gets all the attention. But it plays a huge role in maintaining the tight junctions in the GI tract, which are the connections between your intestinal cells. And when those tight junctions start to break down, you get more permeability, and then the possibility that poorly digested proteins, and now we can get into the protein story, animal proteins, all these things, but the proteins, again, properly broken down into peptides, they can start crossing the barrier, initiate immune reactivity and inflammation. So
or
if you've got
anything else for that reason,
right. But if you've got lots of food sensitivities, right, it might be because, hey, I've got this permeability. It's not like I'm allergic to the 190 of the 100 or 200 foods I tested. It's probably because you have permeability and polyreactivity. But the other thing that's really important is that the short chain fatty acids, especially butyrate, helps modulate and support the Treg system. And when your immune system starts to react, it can become a little bit imbalanced. That's part of a normal immune response, especially if Th1 and Th17 get upregulated. But we need those T regulatory cells to kind of calm the whole process back down. And what I've seen in doing lots of different testing on lots of people over the last 3 decades is that the people who have the low short chain fatty acids on maybe a stool test, those are the people that typically have the most kind of runaway immune response. And as we start to improve their gut function, we see their short chain fatty acid production come up, see their percentage of butyrate improve, their immune system has the ability to calm itself way back down.
Yep.
So those are some of the key points I wanted to make sure the listeners get, because there are some, I don't think we talk enough about it. We talk about leaky gut, right? We talk leaky gut, leaky gut and powders, but we don't spend a lot of time talking about the benefits. And this is where I think, eating a whole food based diet, especially one that has a lot of healthy plants in it, can really provide a huge benefit to the gut and to the immune system in general.
Yeah, I also 100%. Thank you for that amazing summary. You did a much better job than I did. I would say too that this is another conversation piece that I have with people. Again, not to hate on animal proteins at all. I think that certain people do much better than others, and that's great. But if you are a person that says, plants just don't agree with me. If you've ever said that in your life, that I can't, they make me so gassy, or they make me so this or whatever, you have to give your body time to adjust to a new diet. You have to give your body time to not only cultivate those good bacteria again, but also to give them time to feed and to mature and to create these really wonderful nutrients that do help your body. If you are completely avoiding those foods, I would never tell somebody who was not drinking enough water to go from drinking a glass of water to 12 glasses of water in a day. Your body will not accept that. It's going to cause a lot of problems. As much as I would never tell somebody who's having 10 grams of fiber a day to suddenly eat 30 grams of fiber a day, you're going to have a massive GI response, a massive GI upset, and it's going to probably never make you want to eat fiber again. So yeah, it does take, first of all, it's a slow and steady process to heal your gut. You have to be persistent. You have to be consistent and persistent with it. But a part of that is because it takes time for your body to adjust and to heal, and the production of short chain fatty acids. You have to have those good bacteria. Like if this is the first time they've ever been fed properly, you're not going to see that reaction, right? You're not going to see the benefits of that in a week or 2 weeks. You're going to see that in 3 to 6 months down the line, and you have to really give it time to work its magic.
Yeah, and I think one of the reasons you really need to give it time is because we have to consider it's oftentimes not just the food that's creating the problem, right? It's your lifestyle, it's your lack of sleep, it's your habits, your behaviors, your thoughts, your actions. And we're not, even though we want to give you a protocol of support products that are going to help you heal, your physiology still has to be in a heal phase.
Yep.
If you're at high level of stress, the best those support products are doing is managing a condition. They may not even be in a healing mode. So, I think that's where people get shocked. Like I did a 30-day gut protocol and it was better when I did it. And then when it didn't do, then I'm back to the same stuff. Right. Because all you did was put some powders in there and calm the inflammatory process, but you still have all the same things that were creating problem to begin with.
You're still with that toxic relationship. Your work is unfulfilling. You're in a house that's filled with mold. You're drinking tap water that's unfiltered. I mean, you name all the things that we're doing that we're not addressing that's causing those problems too. I mean, you hit the nail on the head. We can't. You have to look at your entire life and make some, giving yourself relief right away through a protocol, through an AIP diet, through doing what you can to neutralize your system as much as possible is paramount. It's going to give you the motivation to keep going. But do you stop there? No, you have to keep. It's an onion. You got to keep peeling back those layers and figuring out, how to find balance in every aspect of your life. And that takes a lot of time.
Yeah.
It takes a lot.
Yeah, it takes time. And you have to consider that if you don't address those other things, the best you're going to do is manage a bad condition.
Yeah.
And that's frustrating.
Yeah. I deal a lot with patients that have mold, just to go back there for a second. And the first thing that I say is, we can do, if you're still living in it, we can do the best we can to make you feel better. But if you're clearing it out and then just breathing it back in again, day in and day out, what's the point? What is the point? You're going to get sick again. So, you have to really be serious about you have to make some concessions in your life, I think, to get to a better spot. And I think that convenience factor that people aren't used to, having to work a little bit for their health, I think I struggle with
Yeah.
that.
I think what a lot of people want is just
Quick
give me the
fixes,
simple
quick
supplements that are
fixes.
going to fix
Yeah.
it, right? I just had this discussion last night at a neighbor's house that, um, you know, I've had patients taking 26, 32, the most so far is 42 individual bottles of supplements in a day, which 100
Wow.
150 capsules of stuff
How
per
is that
day.
person's liver looking?
Yeah. And they wanted to know what else they were missing. Like what in my typical line is if you need this many supplements to feel shitty, you probably don't need any of them. So the first step we need to do is get you off of them. But it's not unusual that I see people that are coming in with loaded with supplements because they're hoping this bottle of supplements is going to
Yeah.
fix what drugs
Yeah.
couldn't do.
Well,
It's just not a reality.
hoping to bypass, I feel like in my experience, it's hoping to bypass the harder stuff. I mean, it's hard to address. I mean, it's one thing. One of my favorite parts about what I do is that you do have control over what you put in your body. That is, you do have control over that, and you can make a lot of progress in your health and your life by starting with the body, right? But once you start getting into, your relationships and are you fulfilled at work, or if you're, having to figure out these other things that are causing mental strain, stress, anxiety, and other areas of your life, like people don't necessarily want to do that work.
Or they don't tie it to their
Or they
other
don't,
issues, right? They just
or
like,
they assume it's not related. Right.
yeah, like I can
Exactly.
manage it. I'm managing it. Yeah, you're
Yeah.
managing it, but it's creating a problem
With
on your
200
physiology.
supplements a day.
Yeah. So, hey, Melanie, we barely scratched the surface and what maybe we're going to talk about today. I still wanted to talk to you about fasting, good, bad, what's
Yeah.
the fasting mimicking diet. So I think maybe the best thing to do is if you're open to it, we'll get you to schedule and come back on and we'll talk about the
Yeah.
rest of
Let's
the
do
stuff
it.
on the dietary stuff. But I think we got to wrap this one up today. So if people want to know more about you and what you do, where can they go? Where can they find out more about you and what you do?
Sure. My practice is called Holistic Ritual with a WHOLISTIC ritual. So you can go to holisticritual.com, or you can find me on the social channels at Health and Melness, and that's HEALTHNMELLNESS, Health and Melness.
I see what you did there. Yeah.
You like that?
Clever.
You like
Yeah.
that fun?
Clever. All right. So we're going to sign off for today. So, listeners, this was a great podcast. Share this with friends and family. When you get a chance, go to wherever you listen to your podcast or download them and give us a rating. I think five, I think is like the
Five sounds
best.
good.
This one,
Five
this
sounds
one would
good.
definitely be like a
Yeah.
5 out of 5.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
So, until next time, we'll sign off for today, but thanks for listening. And Melanie, thanks for coming on the Thyroid Answers
Thanks for having
podcast.
me. Appreciate it.